keep finding ways that we're helping partners, finding either, balance in their life or focus or purpose.
Practices that are going to help improve your project management skills or your finances.
We're here to talk about setting long-term goals and then how to achieve them.
Increasing your quality, therefore becoming the best place in town to work. Welcome to Academy Live.
Welcome to Academy Live. Are you tired of unproductive and inefficient meetings? Do you want to make the most of your time and resources in 2024? Then you've come to the right place. In this week's episode of Academy Live, we'll share expert tips on how to have good, effective, and efficient meetings in the new year. Our guest this week is co-founder of Strety, Larry Garcia. Straty is an EOS-compatible app that you can run in Microsoft Teams. We all know there are many different types of meetings, and they are not all created equal. So in today's show, we'll learn how to set goals, create an agenda, manage your time effectively, and much more. We'll also discuss why it's important to intentionally plan your meetings and how doing so can help you achieve your goals faster. Don't let another meeting just go to waste. We're looking forward to talking with Larry about this all very shortly. But for now, let's welcome Rex and Chris.
Hey!
Hi. How's it going?
Glad to be here.
Bessie, I can't wait. I wanted to do a better intro on this, but I can't wait. I want to hear about your trip. You took a very big trip recently. I want to hear more about it. Tell us a little bit about what you just came back from experiencing.
Well, here I am feeding a kangaroo. If that gives you a little hint.
Aww.
Here I am in Tasmania. I was feeding a kangaroo. I was in Australia, so I was very excited, and I have a few more photos to show you. So let's take a look at some of those. Here's me and Maria. She is in APAC, part of our academy team in Australia. So I was so excited to hang out with her. You see more kangaroos are in the background there. This is here in Bondi Beach in Sydney. It's near where my cousins live, so I was visiting them and taking walks around. That's me and my boyfriend, Matt. We took the trip together. We're in Sydney. And here's Matt again. You might see something on my finger. I got engaged on this trip. He's actually my fiance now, so very excited. And we took a little boat together and a sunset cruise. Here I am in Sydney, the Opera House. And
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
So awesome. It's so funny when you said that. You're saying my boyfriend. I'm like, wait
I
a
was like,
second.
should I say boyfriend?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was like, what's she gonna say?
Yeah. So chronologically, that must have been before the proposal.
Right, exactly.
And then the next picture was he's a fiancé. Yeah, I was going to tease you. I wasn't sure if you were, counting, what you'd done, kind of.
No.
Well, sorry, all the eligible guys out there. Bessie is off the market.
It's good to make an announcement like this on YouTube so that everyone knows. But I had a great trip.
I love that you got to see. I love that you got to see Maria. I love working with Maria.
Yeah.
She's great, and the chance that you got to go down and kind of meet up there, I think, is pretty amazing. What is a highlight? I know this had to be a big trip, but what's one thing that you think really stands out in your memory from your trip?
I mean, besides getting engaged, that's definitely high up there. I got to swim at the Great Barrier Reef, and it was actually really. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to go because there had been a cyclone the week before. We made it there partially because Matt was so intent on making it there to propose to me. But we were also really lucky where we were. The cyclone didn't affect the visibility, so we were able to see sharks. We saw clownfish. We saw giant clams. So that was a real bucket list item, and we were able to take a look and see it. So that was a highlight for me too. and
That's
probably
We're
awesome.
extremely
so excited for you that you got to go on that trip, and you know the surprise.
Yeah, it was a great time. And not quite as exciting, but Rex, you have a new segment that you're going to tell us a little bit about, but can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily expecting to be in Denver today, so we're going to actually have to start the segment next week when I'm back in the home office. But um, I was talking to somebody about how when I started doing the show, I had this really crowded, dark bookcase behind me with all these business books and memorabilia on it, and I remember working with studios. They're like, "You think you can simplify that a little bit?" And I had to kind of go through and make some decisions. Like, okay, if I can't have the 40 business books that mean something to me, what are the 5 that I want to have up there? And of all these trinkets and memories from my career, what are the ones that are important to me that have a deep meaning and that I chose to put in that background? So, what we're going to do for several weeks here is just kind of talk about what's on Rex's shelf. So, go through the next rest of the quarter here. All right. That kind of brings us to the point where we're going to bring our guest on, Mr. Larry Garcia.
Hey, Larry.
Hey, how you doing?
Welcome.
Great to see you today,
Glad-
Larry. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Now, Larry, I want to start this. So I know you've had an opportunity to work together through some of the peer groups here at Pax8 and some of the events, et cetera. But I want to put you on the spot right away and have you do a humble brag. Let's tell the audience a little bit about you, and I like to call it the humble brag. So about Larry.
Yeah, about me. Current co-founder of Strety Software, from Miami, first generation American, sort of, following my parents' American dream of immigrating here from Colombia. And, high school in Miami, Florida State University. I was previously in the investment banking world, but found myself in the channel when I joined BrightGauge as a first employee back in 2013. Grew in that role to CRO and ran all of sales, marketing, and customer success. And had a phenomenal team there. And then now, moving on here to Straty. So co-founding this product with my co-founder Brian Dosal and my other co-founder Eric Dosal as well, who were the founders of BrightGauge. So excited to be on the journey now and back in the channel.
You seem to be hitting the market right where it is, right? Like we talk about how the companies go through these maturity stages, right? That first maturity stage, everybody kind of reports to the owner, and there really is no such thing as KPIs or measurement or strategy or anything like that, right?
Yeah,
And then keep in mind our industry isn't very old, right? But as
yeah,
companies get to that second maturity stage where they've kind of got an owner and a service manager running the company, they're seeing a lot of industry specific benchmarks and things out there. And the natural thing is to say, hey, how do we compare to that? So then they go in their PSA and they try to run some reports, and none of the reports make any sense because there's just no data. So they kind of decide, oh, we need better data. And that's kind of when they really double down on process and procedure and standardizing process to create the data that creates now they've got KPIs that they can measure. And I typically argue that even in that second stage company, the owner's close enough to all the day-to-day metrics that they really don't need KPIs because their gut is still accurate. But
yeah,
as they move toward the end of that stage, in order to move into the third stage where they got more of a leadership team running the company, they're going to have to rely on the data because the owner's a couple stages removed from all the day-to-day interaction. Their gut becomes less accurate. And, BrightGauge sort of hit the market right when our industry was trying to figure out how to have dashboards and gauges. And before I ask you my question about Straty, can you kind of fill me in on like how you hit the market perfect there?
Oh wow! I mean, it's a great story. I think my co-founder Brian was in charge of his MSP. So they had MSP out of Miami called CompuQuip, and was just frustrated with doing SQL report writer. And he had some technical background, but it was really frustrating and hard in comparison to this is 2012, 2013. iPhone's starting to take off. Consumer apps are a little bit more advanced than business to business apps. So it was like there's got to be a better way, and started building to that. And like you said, I mean, so many things went right for us, Rex. AWS had come out. We were kind of one of the early. I remember it was pulling teeth getting people to trust the cloud, right? It's kind of the inverse now. To have on premise is sort of like the thing that you have to convince someone to go back on premise, and
You're
it's probably
so
not
right on
likely.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of crazy. But it was able for us to build software and deploy it across a lot of endpoints. And you're right, it was the maturity. APIs were starting to get better. There was just a lot of industry leaders that were providing great data and an open platform. ConnectWise, Kaseya, Datto at the time, Continuum, who ultimately bought us. And so it was just it's one of those things. It's a little bit of luck, a lot of hard work. But yeah, you're right. It was the industry matured right when we were looking for KPIs. We happened to be there, and then we executed to perfection. And we had an incredible development team, and definitely an incredible customer service team. I would say we were really great with customer service, because this was so new, Rex. Like what you were saying, a lot of people said, "Hey, how do I build this KPI? I want to do this. How do I do it with your tool? I don't know SQL, but I know there's a table somewhere." So us providing that kind of white glove service was
And
pretty
having that
helpful. But
having those dashboards where you could kind of say, hey, these are the popular ones other people are using, and then I just watch the industry go to work on their process to try to make those dashboards accurate, right? um, and we even worked together as C-level, where I
yeah,
remember having these standard processes for triaging a ticket, dispatching a ticket, entering time on a ticket. And I was saying, hey, phase 5 is measuring, are people following our processes? And I remember sending over a triage process dashboard, Visio diagram, and working with you and your team at BrightGauge to create some dashboards that were like, are people triaging tickets following the process, right? And it's like they're either following the process or they're not, based because we have a dashboard that says it. And you could still get those today from BrightGauge, if you want the C-level dashboards. And I remember when you guys got sold to Continuum, and then I was like, what? And then it became part of ConnectWise. I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
yeah,
But anyway, the industry kind of matured, and it grew from just the owner and the service manager running a company to the owner, and there's always been the larger companies that were more the owner and a leadership team that consists of somebody from sales, somebody from finance, somebody from admin, 2 or 3 people typically from the service department. And now you've got this leadership team. The owner's 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 levels removed from that day-to-day interaction. The gut's totally inaccurate. They're totally dependent on those dashboards for the data for the company, for their scorecards. But there's a big problem with accountability, where when everybody reported to the owner, it was super easy for the owner to impart their culture. They didn't even have to document it. They just lived it every day. And then, but now we've got a leadership team, and the culture is coming from whoever their manager is. And it just becomes really crazy. You got silos of individual managers that are building their own, strategy and trying to implement it. And that's what happened at C-level, and we discovered EOS, right? And can you tell us a little bit about your take on EOS, but more importantly, how you timed Straty almost exactly perfect with the market again on where the majority of the solution provider MSP businesses are?
yeah.
Any-
We had an incredible, at the first 2 or 3 years that I was there, and we were hiring developers, and this is 2013, 2014. We had a tough time. And we had an MSP partner of ours at a Tiger Paw conference in Omaha, Nebraska. So give us the book. And now it's like one of my like, if I think of like a Bible and like the traction book, and a book by Peter Drucker, those are the things that I have sort of, next to my shelf. The It transformed our company. We calmly grew to 35 employees. It was still hard work, but it was very calm, and we got to 2,000, 2,500 MSPs. Exactly what you said. It was like the first phase for us was we had KPIs. It wasn't a flat structure anymore. Now we needed to get sort of data in, and so we were living what we were selling to sort of MSPs. And just the traction book was a huge help. Following those L10s was a huge help. So that's level 10 meeting. And we felt that we had to build something. We did. We built something very basic. It almost looked like Microsoft DOS internally. And once the sale happened, it sort of kind of sat there, gathering dust. We had one go at it in 2020 in the middle of the COVID pandemic because a couple of us weren't really doing anything. But in earnest, I would say it's almost like a rebirth. In the last year, Brian, Eric, and myself have really put our heads down. We've got an incredible engineering team now, headed by our CTO Edwin, and we're sort of kind of bringing the band back together, and building in earnest something that's EOS compatible, and it's along with meetings, KPIs, and goals. And so I think it's the right time for the market. I just can't imagine any MSP not thriving with putting some sort of process in place for meetings or business operations.
I like how Rex kind of identified you kind of this pattern and kind of aligning with kind of what's going on in the industry and that awareness. I want to go back real quick. We'd asked, ahead of time. Another thing that we do when we have guests on the show is to bring up a quote, and I kind of want to hit this real quick, and then kind of get into some of your take on some of the upcoming trends. But Willis, if you could pull up the quote, Larry, I'd love to have you read this and tell us why this is relevant for you.
Yeah, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. That's by W. Edwards Deming. So W. Edwards Deming was sort of put in charge of getting Japan rebuilt after World War II. So if you think of things like Toyota just-in-time processes, those type of like quality manufacturing things, he's the godfather of those sort of frameworks. And so he's in that kind of same school as Peter Drucker. About really processing everything, right? Everything's a process. There's no one-off things, right? If something happens twice, there needs to be sort of rules around it. In its ugliest form, it's bureaucracy. But in its more beautiful form, is just a process that really alleviates a lot of mental cycles. And yeah, he's somebody I follow a ton and try to read his work, and I definitely love that quote because we found ourselves at Breakage specifically, we'd have a client meeting, right? And they were all so different. We look at the videos and they were all different meetings. Said, yeah, we're always talking about sort of the same 3 or 4 things. Some things are different. And then when we put the process in place, when we sent CSATs out, the customer success improvements were through the roof of, that meeting ran really crisply. And that's sort of about following both sort of, processes in that fashion, but also, putting something in place, sort of like what Traction does for, small businesses and medium-sized businesses.
I got a couple thoughts. First one, just to get it out there, Chris and I are actually in Denver doing Pax8 Academy's 2-day annual. So like literally we're right in the middle of living this. And I had a couple. We have a thing that we do in the Academy leadership team called Seat at the Table, where we bring in an individual contributor that's not normally part of the leadership team to participate in, and we do this quarterly. And it's amazing how energized they are when they go back, right? And they're like, well, what's the agenda? And I literally just gave them a link to the book Traction. So if you show up not having read this, you'll be totally lost. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So can you maybe talk a little bit about, Traction and
Yeah, so the traction book was written by Gino Wickman, and he comes from the EO world, and ran a small family business, and really just kind of put into place the stuff that you basically read about in sort of business operations class in a university, for example, but really distilled it in a very easy, no frills fashion. And it's got to be pound for pound the best business book that I've ever read, as far as actionable advice. You get a business book, it's, 150, 200 pages, could have been written in 15. When I think of the traction book, it's like, it's 200 pages. It could be written in 185, right? There's not a lot of fluff in there.
No,
Even the
I
anecdotal
totally agree.
stories are fantastic. And I'm looking forward to seeing it on your Rex on the Shelf segment, I'm sure, at some point.
I'll
Um,
give you a hint. It is on the shelf. Um,
okay, awesome.
So,
on
Awesome.
Yeah, I think I might have said this on the show before, but at sea level, if I look at the 12-year revenue growth graph, the first 6 years I was pretty much by myself as a leader, and there was a steady but slow, at a certain angle on the chart, growth in our revenue. And then I got some business partners, and I felt a different fiduciary responsibility, and there was growth at like a new angle for a year or two. Um, but then all of a sudden there was another change in the angle of the growth of sea level, and it's timed exactly with discovering EOS and traction. And when I look back on that, I didn't understand how impactful it was. When we're like, we have accountability problems, we have culture issues. Somebody said you should read the book Traction. I had no idea the impact it was going to have on the company.
I,
Hey, go ahead, Chris.
so we see that a lot in through the peer groups and working with MSPs. So, Larry, I know you've seen it too, and you've seen the impact. But I'd be curious. Go ahead and finish what you're going to say, and I'll come back to you if I got a question sideways.
Yeah, the angle thing is exactly what happened to us, Rex. Like you can literally see when the leadership team read the book, and you can literally almost see when the rest of the team read the book. It's basically two angles about a quarter apart, and it made sense. It's so hard to describe because you always get business book recommendations, uh, and so when we got it, we're like, it's another business book. Like, yeah, sure, one of us will read it. And I believe Brian or Eric read it. And it's like, we got to read this book. Everyone's got to read this. And the angle change in revenue was um, sort of something you could not avoid looking at. So yeah, I thought it was incredible.
So here's the question. So putting that in the context of what we just talked about, and let's talk a little bit about Straty. I kind of want to pull this out a little bit. Person on the street, how do you describe what you do and what your business model is? Trent.
Well, this is good because this is fantastic because I just had my mother's 80th birthday, so I had to do this exercise like 1,000 times in 3 languages. So we if you imagine any company, right? So every company has an operating system, right? The default one is called the chaos operating system. That's gut owner kind of knows what they're doing, they're running. And I'm not saying chaos in an offensive way. It's just there's no really structure in place, and what will happen, right? So sort of the definition of chaos. This is sort of like a software that helps you get, fundamentally, into a more thoughtful, a more proactive operating system. And sort of the lifeblood of that, if I think of, what's the oxygen of it? It's meetings, right? And, as knowledge workers, that's sort of our basic cell component is meetings. There is a lot of people that complain about meetings. What they're really complaining about is inefficient meetings, right? And those are those unstructured meetings that you go in, there's no agenda, you're meeting about something, but you don't really know what the outcome's supposed to be or what the question is. And so this is just software that says, all right, here's some guardrails, here's tools to put a meeting agenda together, right? To share it easily, to have it alert you inside of Microsoft Teams. There's takeaways from the meeting. Okay, we'll quickly make a takeaway, right? That's assigned to the right person and it will alert them that they have to do something. There's integrations into, currently ConnectWise Manage and soon Autotask next week, where, hey, if that to-do happens to be technical, create a ticket automatically. When that ticket is closed, close it automatically back in Strety. So it's It's basically something to help run a business with some sort of guardrails in place, with templates on meetings, with templates on some, goals or rocks ideas, a place to put your KPIs to make sure work is being done, and even holding things such as, cultural things, right? The values of the company. When we hire, what are we looking for? Where do we want to be in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? So having that all very accessible in one place and be able to interact with each other, which is where the real magic happens in putting an operating system in place at a business.
I love the organization and accountability that it provides. So, this being a tool to really help, owners and leadership teams of a business kind of walk through that whole process of converting chaos into an organizational, consistent process to address their issues and to track things, right? And I also love the fact that you said describing it to your mother, because that's almost exactly how I asked the question, so that makes sense. Just the way people understand it and that they see a value in it, what has been, in this process in designing this, you see the value. How are you finding it most effective to communicate that to prospects or the partners or the people that you work with? How are you communicating the value of what you're bringing?
Yeah, for that, I think of it of like, and especially now it's New Year's, right? So everyone's in their New Year's resolutions. Total wine and liquor stores are empty, gyms are full and packed to the brim right now. So this is sort of the beginning of the year. And what I say a lot to a lot of MSPs, and I say, look, what you're doing is everyone's going to the gym, right? And by that means you're probably having meetings, you kind of know what you want to do. Like everyone's doing this, right? The question is, are you the person that goes to the gym and kind of lifts up a barbell, does a couple curls, maybe gets on the treadmill, leaves, comes back the next day, maybe gets on the treadmill, sort of in the gym, you have a good habit, right? Or do you want to be the person who says, all right, let me document that. Let me see how much am I doing it? Am I improving it? Am I getting stronger? Am I getting faster? Am I feeling better, right? Am I becoming the person I wanted to become on January 1st when I said I wanted to get healthier? And so that's sort of how I describe it a little bit anecdotally to MSPs. Is like, you're doing this stuff already. You already know what you want to get out of a business. You maybe don't have it defined, but meetings probably, maybe a lot of them are actually reactive because you're not planning them out, right? You have a ton of tickets coming up for a certain problem. We have to meet on this. Why are we getting so many tickets about this? Well, that probably could have been caught, 2 weeks beforehand if you had a meeting in place every week with the service desk and you started picking up on those first tickets and not ticket number 10 or number 20 on that problem. So that's sort of how I describe it when I talk to managed service providers about EOS and using Straty for doing that framework.
Mm-hmm.
I love that there's newer and better tools for aligning with the EOS and taking advantage of you mentioned long meetings or meetings about nothing, but man, that EOS level 10 meeting, which I think we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, makes a huge difference and keeps us focused on talking about the right stuff, right? And to have a tool available in the Pax8 marketplace where you can really track what's happening. I believe we have a question in chat that we're going to bring up, Larry, that we'd love to get your take on. I can't read it, but there we go. How is Straty leveraging AI from MSP Madman?
Well, the answer is not yet, but it is sort of one of our 4 big pillars for 2024. And
that's a
it's
very
definitely something we want to go after.
common place for folks to be right now.
It is, yeah. It's my thoughts on AI, and gosh, I hope I don't get tarred and feathered for this. I think in the short term it's overrated, and I think in the long term it's underrated for what people think is going to happen. But we do think that there is a huge opportunity for you to gather insights on, if you think of someone that's a KPI that's not necessarily super short all the time, but is always pretty close to that threshold where it's green or red, right? And having that auto alert, a manager and saying, hey, let's have a conversation about this. And we're thinking through it. We're looking through the documentation. It's such a new field. We've definitely had a ton of conversations around it. But what we essentially want to do is there's going to be some data inside of our own system and leveraging sort of AI to say, all right, surface this thing that maybe you're not noticing. And I think that's sort of our first iteration when we think of AI in Straty for this year is how can it do that? Then also just being able to ask it sort of general questions, right? Like, hey, what is a good, EBITDA for a small business with 10 employees and, X amount of revenues, right? What is that number? To just get a sort of range or a start of a conversation. So we think that's how we'll plan to leverage it, but not currently today.
Love that. I think it's time to switch over to bring Bessie into the conversation. But before we do that, pointing at me weird. Before we do that, I think we want to bring in Keith for his weekly sales pitch.
Play ball.
Hi, Keith Marciano with Pax8 Academy. Happy New Year. It's a fresh slate. Hopefully you've already set some goals and plans to improve over what happened in 2023. If not, let's start today. If you have not created that sales resolution, or they're too broad, or you're worried about them, this episode of Sales Pitch is for you. Where do you want to be a month from now, 6 months from now, at the end of the year? Start here by asking yourself, what do you wish you would have done differently or better back in 2023 or over the last 6 months? Focus on what you want today. 1 new client a month, 40% year-over-year revenue growth. Whatever it is, this will emotionally connect you to what you want. One of my favorite sales laws is the law of 30. Never fails. Whatever you do over the next 30 days is going to impact what happens in your pipeline 60, 90 days from now. So that goes either way. If you don't do anything, you're not going to have nothing. If you work hard, you're going to start having a full pipeline. So let's touch all the bases on 4 sales goals an IT service provider should have. 1, have 1 coffee meeting per week with a center of influence. Somebody who's doing business with your potential prospect. And if you don't drink coffee, have a cup of tea or a glass of water, whatever works for you. Just get out of your comfort zone and meet with somebody. 2, attend a networking event, 1 per month, where your ideal prospect is. Fish where fish are. 3, create a marketing plan that will attract your main clients, the clients that you want to target. Go after those folks first. Go where they are, have that focus on that plan. 4, there are limited hours in a day. Time flies, and finding new clients is even tighter. There's only a certain amount of sales hours in a day. A full pipeline cures all ills, period, full stop. So I'll give you goal 4.5. If you're not skilled at sales, invest time in learning this year. Sales is a skill, not an activity. Pax8 Academy has a lot of sales courses geared toward IT service providers. A lot of them are free. I would recommend going into Pax8 Academy and looking up sales techniques for emerging service providers. Invest in yourself, and Happy New Year.
Well, that was such a great video from Keith. I was actually talking to him yesterday, and he was like, "Oh, I should have had my video on New Year's resolutions and goals on the very first week of the back to Academy Live." And I was like, "No, it's going to fit perfectly with what we're talking about today on today's show." So I'm really glad he was talking about what goals you should set and things to think about when you're planning your sales goals for the year. But hi, Larry. It's great to see you again. And I wanted to just hear from you on, First of all, we hear there's a lot of EOS terminology in today's show. So can you just, before we get into it, explain like what is a rock? What's a level 10 or an L10? Like what are all these different things that we're hearing? Can you give a few explanations before we dive into some good goals for the year?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, congratulations, Bessie. That's also
Oh,
fantastic
thank
news at
you.
the top of the show. So congrats to you and your fiance. I'll start off here with, this kind of reminds me of my finance days where it was, any suggestion we made started with like just a heads up, this is not financial advice and, you will lose all your money or whatever disclaimer you go on that stuff. I'm not the OS implementer. I mean, it's wonderful to work with those we have in the past and fantastic to work with. But, definition. So to start with, what in the book is called a level 10 or an L10 meeting is it's a very specific agenda and it's done the same day, same time every week. And it follows the same exact agenda. It starts with some intro time. All these bullet points, except for one, I think are all only supposed to be about, 1 to 5 minutes, which is intro time. Everyone checks in. Hey, did you have a good weekend? Did you show up with, a terrible night's sleep? Just so everybody gets context of who's the person showing up to the meeting. Then you go into what they would call the scorecards or KPIs, and that's just is work being done. That's just to catch something, a leading indicator of something going on. Then you go into what they call your rocks, and that's sort of from the fable of if you have to do something, you have to fill a jar with stuff. You have to put the rocks first, the big things, and then you put sand, and then you put water. So the rocks are sort of the goals for an organization, for a person or company for the quarter. And so you go quickly through those. Then you go into a headlines, which is just FYIs about employees and customers. Hey, Acme Company, one of our customers is hosting a happy hour. Are we going to attend? Or, Bob is out of town for 3 weeks. Or, Bessie is on her wedding or planning her wedding, whatever, is going to be out of the office for a couple weeks. So in those, you talk about those things all very quickly. And lastly, are there any to-dos from last week that we need to talk about or haven't been? Then you get into the meat of the meeting, which is you spend like 90% of your time in in the book, they call it IDS, which is basically going through what issues are we having and how do we solve those. And so you're trying to tackle 3 at a time and you're talking through them, you're delegating on who does what, you're trying to solve these problems and do follow-up action items. And you do that for, a period, and Rex, maybe correct me here, but 90 minutes or so. Is that about right for a typical L10? And some people will modify it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a 90-minute meeting where typically you're targeting about 60 minutes to IDS, identify, discuss, solve on the most important things.
Exactly, yeah. And you go through that and then you conclude with, the follow-up action items and, you do it all over again the next week. This was transformational for us at BrightGauge because we were doing a lot, what I called, firefighting at the water cooler, which is I'd have a bad sales demo and I'd run into Brian, who was in charge of product, and I tell him this is going on, right? And it's just the two of us, right? And there's, Eric, his brother, there's Orlando, the CTO, and what changed for us is when we had that meeting, we had a place to park all these problems in a single place. We said, hey, can this wait till our Monday meeting? And the answer 95 out of 100 times was it can. And then now you had 4 people working on the same problem with a lot more context. And so that was sort of very transformational. The L10 and specifically the issues part was super important.
And I want to chime in and say what I've experienced that's been transformationally is, in that process, it's easy in a meeting to bring something up and talking about it. But in this L10 format, it is critical to define the issue. And I think that's what I've seen be transformational in a lot of companies that really implement this, because you find without that, you can spend an hour or maybe even more talking about what an issue is, and at the end you walk away and then you come back and it's like, wait, we're talking about this again. And what I found is because you haven't really identified the issue. Sometimes you're talking about the symptom. So when you bring it up in this format and you use this agenda and use the techniques and tools and you really break down the issue and identify it and define it, people are talking about the same thing and you're solving for the problem and coming out with a solution not just kind of going in circles, bringing things up. And that's my experience. I'm assuming you'd agree, but I mean, that's a critical component. Anything else you want to comment about, like the IDS and getting to a solve?
Yeah, Chris, that's actually wonderful, and you're right. I think the peeling of the onion of this is going on, it's a problem, and then what you're saying is like, okay, well, it's the symptom of a problem, right? It's this isn't working. Okay, well, why isn't it working? And then getting to that sort of almost like Socratic method of getting to the actual issue of asking questions until you can't ask another question. Say, all right, now we've identified what the problem is. How do we work on that? It's such a great way to describe it.
And sometimes just a quick example of is that people bring up an issue and it's actually 2 or 3, so it's not effective
Happens a lot.
to solve for it, to really define it and say, okay, wait a minute, there's this component and then there's this. Now we have 2 issues. Let's deal with this first, isolate it, identify it, discuss, solve for it, and then approach the other one, which I think is like I said, transformational. Now let's get to rocks. Larry, talk to us a little bit about goal setting. You get that a lot, and confusion around. Tell us your experience and how you kind of handle that.
Oh man, that's a great question. So I come from a slightly different school when you're thinking about quarterly rocks, where a lot of people really want to like push the envelope and push people and say, hey, we're only going to do a rock that we haven't. This might be controversial. 80-70% chance of hitting, right? This is how you extend yourself, right? Our philosophy was that our rocks were to extend yourself. So what we said is company rocks for us were fair and personal rocks were hard, meaning if we wanted to increase revenue, we wanted a pretty good, something that's going to extend ourselves, but we weren't going to do the shoot for the moon thing. And if we got 80% of the way there, it was still a win. Like we always thought it was just better for, camaraderie, for, people being excited about winning. So we always kind of said, again, fair goals, they extend yourself, but not crazy. But when it came to people, those were the ones where we said, hey, you wanted to get, sort of your first Azure certification. Like, no, your rock is that you're going to become an Azure architect, right? We really wanted to push you as hard as you can because we felt in that avenue of growing someone's career was a great opportunity to push someone to the max. And then, worst case scenario, they still probably get their first level Azure certification. But wow, we've experienced a ton where they did get, an architect license and they're like, wow, I didn't think that was possible, but with your support, with pushing me to make that my goal, that was sort of our philosophy on rocks was attainable, smart, very likely to hit goals for work, hard, shoot for the moon rocks for a personal growth of an employee at a company.
I really like that. I think that is a really good philosophy and a good perspective because, sometimes if all your rocks are impossible to get, then it doesn't feel very motivating as you're going through. But, if you have those, and also shows like how you and a company thought about professional development and how important it is. And I really appreciate that. So do you, Larry, have any, can you share any of what your goals are or how you determine what your rocks are going to be that you have coming up?
We're actually about it, kind of like what Rex is saying about being in there for the annual. So we're coming up on hours. So, for us, it's going to be getting our customer success and training really dialed in. I think that's something that we're still working on. It's still sort of a all hands on deck stage for us. And, we're at 3 employees full time, 1 part time. And I'm not counting Brian and myself and Eric, but we're going to increase that to 7 here in the next week or so. That's sort of important. Visiting customers. So that's kind of one of my sort of goals for the year, sort of personal, is I like to visit all 50 states where we have customers. We just had a new customer of ours join from Alaska, so that's going to help a ton. We had a gap there. We just got to find one in Hawaii now, but other than that, I think we're going to spread a lot the continental U.S., so we're good there. But those are sort of the things I want to do. I want to learn how to play guitar personally, and then eventually touch my toes. Though I've been saying that for like 20 years, so I don't know if I'm ever going to touch my toes. I don't look, maybe on camera, 6'3", but it's hard to touch my toes at this height. So
So, well, let me. Okay, so I want to go to this, and I love just thinking about the importance of having things like this and tools like this and processes in place. You're going to be going through significant growth very quickly, but I think your experience and knowing the importance of this process and having an operating system for your business is critical to scale and grow effectively. So, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the mistakes you've seen MSPs or businesses or partner make around meetings or around goals?
I think some of the mistakes I've made is making some of the meetings a little bit more complex than they need to be. These meetings that have 15 agenda points and are very detailed. I think that has to actually be a little bit easier and dialed back a little bit. I mean, you can make more sub points, I think, in some, but I think making it so if somebody had to tell you what's the agenda of this meeting, they could probably read off the top of their heads. I've seen that mistake. I think on the rock side, it's sort of kind of what you were talking about, the issues was being pretty specific on the goals. The SMART methodology on making a goal, I think, is super important. I think sometimes people say, hey, I want to grow revenues by 10%, right? That's great. But being able to be very specific of, all right, well, if that's the case, there really needs to be a rock below that saying, okay, I'm going to start attending more, marketing events, right? Or I'm going to join the, Rotary Club, right? Because I'm going to have more access to opportunities, things that are a little bit more actionable. So I think one is creating rocks for rock's sake without making sub rocks for it. That's going to help get there. I think that's sort of a mistake that is done, is like throwing it on there, checking it once a week. Sure, I'm kind of on track. I'm sort of doing this. But I think tying a little bit harder data to what you're going to do to get that rock, I think is super important. And sometimes I see people don't do it at all.
Well, so since you said you have this annual meeting coming up and Chris and Rex are currently in one of these annual quarterly meetings, what are some tips you have for someone that is setting the agenda, who's planning for a quarterly or an annual meeting so that it can be running effectively?
In the book itself, there's actually a whole agenda, just like there's an agenda for the level 10 agenda. There's actually one, not too dissimilar from the L10, but specifically for the quarterly and for annuals. I think it's one of those, it's a very good opportunity to take a step back and I think dream a little bit. I think it's very hard as a business owner or being in an MSP of like the day to day, and we need to hit these targets and all that. But I think is take an opportunity in these quarterlies to say, gosh, if we did everything right, what does a quarter from now look like? Does it mean we hire another FTE because we've increased revenues, right? Or we got more efficient, or we finally implemented a product that we've had and we haven't been using to our fullest. So I think taking actually a step back and saying, what is the best version of ourselves? And then trying to identify a path to get there a quarter away or a year away. I think that's something that's so powerful, and it's a little bit, a little bit more new agey, but I think it's something that I think is important and that should be done. Follow this agenda from Traction Book or any framework. Scaling Up has a great one. 4DX has another great one. But spending time of how are we living our values? What do we want to get out of this, and how do we grow our people is very important.
And I'm curious to know, in your experience too, we've said on the show before, that the 100th time is great, but you have to do it 99 times to get to the 100th. And sometimes I think whether it's fear, doubt, or clarity, or not wanting to make mistakes, I'd love to hear from you. It seems to me that as people are implementing this or using these tools or doing, putting in and organizing an operating system, so to speak, for their business, it's not perfect the first time. What would you say to someone to instill that confidence of staying with it, being okay not having it perfect? What are some of the key things that you've found that were helpful in your improvement so that it did make a difference? Rex had said there was definitely this angle, once I think you said like 2 quarters, right? And then you started seeing an impact. So walk us through a little bit of your experience of, maybe not being perfect at your first L10 meeting, but at what point did you notice difference? What are the things that you improved on your journey to really use this as, a tool to organize your business?
Yeah, I think it's funny that it's like, it's one of these things that it's so simple that when you look in retrospect and you say, "Well, that was it," like that's all it took was setting an agenda. And I think it's like everyone's looking for this perfect idea or tool, right? You have I don't know how to do sales. And it's like, all right, well, here's the tweak. You go make 100 phone calls, you're going to get better. And then someone actually does it. And they're like, oh, that's all I had to do was, like you said, you make 99 calls. The 100th one goes really well. Now you have a process in place. I feel like everybody, in a small business is 1,000 calls away from $1 million business type of thing. But I think it's just starting. It's starting, and it's identifying the, like, someone has done this before, right? There are people, the academy is a great place. There are people that are doing this at the same time. They're a step ahead of you. There's someone that's a step behind you that is actually super helpful to help those people out, right? That helps your practice. Teaching is kind of the best way to learn. And so I think in being in an environment, joining a peer group, even if it's locally, but there's a lot of opportunities, obviously, here through Pax8 and other places, just get started, right? And I think it's the...
Oh, Larry is in the Northeast, so it may be that he's experiencing some thunderstorms right now.
A little
But
bit of rain and weather.
yeah, he told us that he might lose power, so that might be what has just happened, unfortunately. But yeah, he's
I-
disconnected, so we're gonna just take the rest of the show, and if he comes back, we'll have him join us.
You know what, Bessie, one of the things I really like what he was talking about of just starting and doing it. Getting those first 99 meetings in. I'm not saying it takes 100 or that's the magic number, but the point is just the experience in doing it. And I also, like he said, you kind of looking back in retrospect, I think Rex would probably agree that it's kind of like that, oh, yeah, well, they're just doing it. Once you have some of that experience under your belt, I know my experience, I think, in multiple places has kind of been, making, following the agenda, making headlines. There's a lot of times in meetings when we'll start bringing up our list of ideas and brainstorming. And then all of a sudden, as we're discussing it, someone, wait. We're IDSing, we'll say that, we'll, call it out. Hey, we're issuing, this isn't the place to do that. Let's just get it out there, list it, and then we'll come back. But hopefully, if Larry comes back in, we can kind of get some more of that, experience of, welcome back, Larry. Hope you're safe.
I'm back. It's terrible weather here in Arlington, Virginia, but I did answer the meaning of life there when the power went out. So I'll save that for the next time.
We all missed out on it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Next time.
I just reviewing. I appreciated your answer of just saying, getting that experience, just doing it, and then, it's just talking about some of my experience of following the agenda and learning how to identify, okay, when is the time to talk about it? How do you get your list? So if you don't mind to kind of go back, I'd love to kind of have you continue some of the things that you found to help improve adoption and embracing this model.
Yeah, in getting these sort of frameworks in the hands of all employees, right? Not just keeping it at the leadership level. I was actually super surprised about how much my sales team at Breakage loved following the framework of having a place to park issues, having KPIs they can look at each other's KPIs and rocks and support each other. I think that was also a place where, yes, this is a great book. It's great for leadership, but a lot of the magic does happen when it's across the whole company, adopting a framework in general, not just operating, reactively, essentially. So.
Definitely. I had never experienced a operating system or any kind of organization until I came to Pax8, and I didn't really realize what I'd been missing until I joined, and I was like, oh wow, we have this whole structure. It does really help everyone feel like they're part of the team and that they are working towards the same things, and there's a system in place, and that's of course inherent in the name, but it's really helpful, I think, to anyone that's starting a business or working on a business. I do want to make sure we have time to talk about another business that you have, and until before we get to wrap up. But can you tell us a little bit, Larry, about this coffee business that you have?
Yeah, so software is actually just a side project for me. If I have identified anything, is I'm a coffee farmer. So my family's had a coffee farm since 1992 down in Colombia. So I'm Colombian. Here's the logo. Um, and it's on the 30th kilometer on this road that takes you from the city of Cali to the Pacific Ocean. And so on the 30th kilometers where the farm is, here's a picture from the balcony. Beautiful spot. There's sort of a downward slope there to a river in the bottom. And the farm kind of covers everything you see in the picture, and a little bit sort of kind of going on the upslope is actually a farm owned by a family member. So we kind of consider it all together. And so, yeah, that's, coffee farmer. I've been doing it a long time. I used to drink copious amount of coffee to the detriment of my sleep. So as long as I cut off by noon, then I'm good. But I'm good for 3 or 4 cups before that. And then it's funny that I've actually implemented EOS with the coffee business. Not full
That was
90
be our
minutes.
next question.
Yeah, not a full 90 minutes. I don't think my dad and my sister would be super fond of it, but just getting sort of in there and saying, all right, what kind of major issues do we have? Right now we're going through an El Nino pattern, so there's some weather issues, and so talking through, how we're going to get water, groundwater and stuff like that into the plants, and we have a certain amount of acreage that's getting, basically you cut it to the root, so you get growth again for 5 more years before you replace the plant. The bush basically lasts about anywhere from 5 to 7 years, but if you do this method, then you get like another 3 or 4 years out of it. So talking through all those things is super interesting. So it's kind of nice bringing that to the business, and yeah, the dream is to own a sort of kind of like Apple, like a full, we bring the coffee, we have stores, we have cafes. That's sort of my 10-year goal. But right now it's essentially just grow it and have a good time with family, and we sell it to the Federation of Coffee Growers. Or if anybody knows Juan Valdez, that's the logo for the federation. They're sort of the OPEC for Colombian coffee. And then some of that stuff I just import here locally for myself for drinking and giving out to friends.
I love that picture, which you just throw out. I think it is very important to have an ideal location for your annual meetings. So, Larry, I think I think it'd be great for you to host our next Level 10 annual planning meeting, or even a quarterly meeting. So that's an important
look, it's
component.
January. Like this is the last cold one in Denver. If you have you and Rex on a horse
right
for next year. So.
That'd be worth the price of admission just to see pictures of us on horses. So, Rex, I don't know what you think about that, but we need to talk to Larry about making that happen. Just we've got an ideal location for our planning meeting.
Well, Larry, you've been an amazing guest. We want to make sure that we have a few more minutes. Is there anything that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you want to talk about with us?
Yes, totally forgot about one thing. Super, 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 super important. One-on-ones. Having one-on-ones, you may not think that you have time for them. Make time. Don't make them every week. That's too often. Don't make them once a month. That's too far apart. Find a happy middle between 2 to 3 weeks. Cadence. Bright Gauge hours were every 21 days. So we had 18 one-on-one meetings with every employee. And then specifically, that was the time for the employee to, if it's venting therapy, what they want to get accomplished, how they want to grow professionally, but it's their time. Us at Bright Gauge, we specifically would dock managers bonuses if they canceled one-on-ones. So the only person allowed to cancel, short of a hospital visit, emergency, stuff like that, it's understandable. But the employee was actually a direct report, was the only person allowed to cancel a one-on-one. So one-on-ones, so important, get them done. They don't have to be very long, and just spend some time, giving an avenue or a place to talk.
Well, thank you so much, Larry, for joining us. You were a great guest, and we hope to
Thanks,
have you
Larry.
on again in the future. But now we're going to go to final thoughts.
So Willis is probably going to throw something at me, but I do actually have one more very, very quick question. So I'll use my final thoughts time to ask Larry a question. I don't know that we actually ever connected EOS that we've been talking about so much to Straty and the software application. Do you think we can have Larry make that connection real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rex, just about how it works. Essentially, a quick 30-second overview of how the
Oh,
software
just the
works.
fact that there is it's software and
Yeah,
it helps administer the EOS methodology. And
yeah. So we built it inside of the Microsoft Teams application. No one wants another login. Back in the day, Breakage was one of the first kind of cloud logins for MSPs. Now there's 25 places that you have to log in. So it's built into the Microsoft Teams App Store. And essentially in there, you'll find tools for meeting agendas. You'll find teams for creating rocks, quarterly annual goals, running one-on-one meetings. And then in the near future, we'll add things like surveys, annual reviews, and we're constantly building. And we're very much of the old Breakage philosophy was build an incredible product and that'll market itself as opposed to spend a lot of marketing money. So that's kind of what the software does.
thank you. Appreciate that. No, awesome. I'm so happy we had him on. This is exactly the right time of year to be talking about, business strategy and leveraging tools and business operating systems as we head into 2024. I just, want to see our partner community leveraging Straty if they can.
And I think my final thought just is that action, kind of just do it, get involved, get started. It's not perfect the first time, but take those steps. And I think understanding the value that having a structure and organization in how to run your business is so impactful. Bessie?
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. I would say just to have an agenda for a meeting, planning for your meetings, not just throwing people together, makes a big impact and makes everyone feel like they're part of the team and that they're contributing effectively to your goals. So I want to just thank everyone for watching. Be sure to check us out next week. We're going to have Keith Marciano. He won't be doing a sales pitch. He'll be talking about the result selling framework. So we're so excited to have him on. Remember, we're live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Mountain, and we're on demand always. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss one of our videos. Rex, want to close us out?
Ask yourself, what are you going to do differently tomorrow?